We watch Brazil. Let's watch Brazil.
Let me cut to the chase.
Brazil is great. They're like brothers from another mother. Really, they are. Brazil and Portugal. They're like, not only are they Latinos, or at least Portugal, it's an honorary Latino, but Brazil, even though we don't speak the language, we're like, yo, we're basically the same. Hello, man. How are you doing? Good to see you. Let's watch Brazil, man.
It's surprising that Brazil is not a superpower. Sure, Brazil is a modestly sized power and absolutely
Yeah, Brazil's fucking massive.
Latin
dude.
America's regional power,
It's so
but it
fucking
could have
big.
been global. Honestly, Brazil is like a tropical United States. Both isolated New World nations, both have an insane amount
And
of
Brazil has like some really attractive people in general, of course, men and women, but I would love to go to visit Brazil. Which state in Mexico do the cartels have the most power? So a lot of the northern states. So Sinaloa obviously would come probably as the biggest one. A lot of these, like Sonora, Chihuahua, Tamaulipas, would be a big one. This little panhandle state here. I don't know if you guys can see that correctly. There we go. Also, this one, Jalisco, probably a lot of the rural areas are heavily controlled by the cartels. Some of the Pacific coast here have pretty bad cartel control. So that's basically the north and this part of the coast where the cartels have like huge control of the police. Does Spanish have dialects? Can Mexicans understand Argentinians? Spanish does have dialects, and sometimes it's kind of hard to understand each other. But for the most part, I think we can understand what we're saying, like 95% of what we're saying. Some dialects are more difficult. I think the Chilean dialect is like very fucking hard. Brazil is a regional power, but not a superpower. True. Brazil is basically Portuguese version of the U.S. True. Brazil should have never abolished the monarchy. Dom Pedro, right? He was pretty popular. A lot of Brazilian people love Dom Pedro. All the Romance languages are similar. You have President Bolsonaro, who's controversial. Yeah, not a huge fan of Bolsonaro. How accurate is Narcos in Mexican society? Are you talking about like the Narcos Netflix show? Because it's pretty accurate. It's like pretty fucking accurate, unfortunately.
territory and a huge amount of farmland. The United States was able to use that position and size to spread its influence to every country on Earth. Brazil? Not so much. It's a bit of a meme that Brazil is the country of the future, and always will be, but never ends up that country. I mean, Brazil has a lot going for it. Great position, huge size, and
My ex-boyfriend is from Brazil. He wants them to return to being a monarchy. He's fed up with the corruption in the government. I mean, just imagine how bad, Dilma Rousseff, Lula da Silva, and many of the other presidents have been either arrested or charged with corruption. It's worse than in Mexico, and that's a very low bar, to surpass. When your country's more corrupt than fucking Mexico. The show Netflix. The Narcos from Netflix. It's pretty accurate. Like almost like probably like 80+% accurate.
large labor force, but is also rife with corruption, relatively poor, and the Earth's murder capital. Where did it go wrong, and will Brazil ever be the country of the future? Brazil's first fatal flaw is what made it in the first place: its geography. Brazil's geography is big, like really big. It has everything: forest, plains, mountains, rainforest, highlands, and lots of coast. Its first major feature is one you all know: the Amazon. The Amazon rainforest is the largest of its kind.
Basically, Brazil is the Russia of South America, right? You can't go to war with Brazil. You can't invade Brazil, right? Like, it's not happening. Yeah. A girl from Mexico, she looked hella white, and she was telling me how much she hated Mexican Americans and white people. I think a lot of Mexicans see white people from Mexico and white people from the U.S. differently, but I don't know. It's kind of weird. The monarchy can be better than democracy depending upon the leader. true. When it comes to dialects and accents, I sometimes can't understand our northern English friends. Oh, the Scottish, dude, I know, right? The Scottish accent is just so fucking hard. I can't understand Scottish, like Scottish English. It's just like, no, I'm not even
In the
gonna try.
world, obviously it's not ideal to live in. First of all, you can't farm without clearing tons of trees, so you can't eat. And second of all, there are so many bugs in rainforests that you'll
Mosquitoes,
probably
fuck that
contract some
shit.
sort of
Yeah,
deadly
it's
disease,
horrible.
probably COVID AIDS. This makes a huge chunk of Brazil's territory unsuitable for humans.
Oh, no fucking way. You got Lula da Silva running. I think he was freed from jail, right? Oh my god. That sounds like a corrupt version of like a Donald Trump beat Bernie Sanders, Like it's just not the best scenario. It's gross. It's so gross. Yeah. That's fucking gross.
The river in the Amazon does provide a ton of fresh water though, allowing some small settlements like Manaus and tons of indigenous people groups. The second feature is Brazil's escarpment. It's great escarpment. An escarpment is just the cliffs on the edge of a plateau, and these cliffs are long and tall. This makes most of the cliffs on the edge of a plateau, and these cliffs...
And you can actually see most of the biggest cities in Brazil are within this little coast, right? Porto Alegre, Rio de Janeiro, obviously, Salvador, Recife, Natal, Fortaleza. These are some huge cities. And they're just within that coast, right? I'm conflicted with democracy because that means West Europe and Americas are the only places that want control of the world, probably. The ban on Lula's candidacy was lifted. Oh man, it's so gross.
Are long and tall.
I feel so bad for Brazil.
Interior essentially an island away from the Brazilian
because
coast.
It's a great country.
Building roads, tracks, and any sort of paths to get to Brazil's agriculture-producing interior is much more difficult. Not to mention that being in a hot, humid tropical area, building roads and infrastructure is already harder. It's not the
easiest thing to do.
Concrete and cement needs to be dry to set. But the real problem is most people are crowded on the coast, and there's lots of it. Brazil is the longest country from north to south, and without the technology to...
Lula is actually leading in the polls.
Chile 2.0.
Holy
shit.
There's
a huge divide between the people and the things the people want or need. The escarpment likely stunted Brazilian growth by decades. Then there's the tropical issue. Tropical areas never grow as fast as temperate areas. A, they don't have a winter to freeze bugs and create coordination between people since you had to have a seasonal deadline for crops. And 2, tropical areas always focus on agriculture. It's just too easy to grow food there. So tropical areas always become the breadbasket of the world, but so far haven't really industrialized since so many people are in the agriculture business. That's why Brazil was settled, and it's that settlement that was Brazil's second fatal flaw. The way Brazil was colonized shaped its society to this day. In the early 1500s, the Portuguese started colonizing what we know as Brazil. At the time, there were around 2 million indigenous Brazilians. However, unlike Mesoamerican and the Andean civilizations, there were no cities or...
Wait, a community? Holy, wait, I have to see that. Well, shit. Would you look at that? Damn. We live in a pretty strange world.
Infrastructure. The native Brazilians lived in small villages, mostly tribal, and certainly not under one empire. The Portuguese were using Brazil more as a stop in their African and Indian Sea empires. And
it's particularly interesting because Portugal has such a small population, right? What is it, 10, 20 million? While Brazil has over 200 million. And of course, there's a lot of European immigrants to Brazil. We got the Germans, there's a lot of Asians too, though. Japanese, Lebanese, the African descents of the slaves there, and the people who are mixed race, and the indigenous people. So overall, Brazil is a pretty diverse
of a real settlement
country.
Portugal used human trafficking to bring in the settlers of Brazil.
Brazil is a strange location, like for white supremacists. True. Jimmy Carter talked about how similar their communities are to the American South. Wow, damn. I mean, at the end of the day, Bolsonaro was elected, wasn't he?
Portugal. I mean, the Portuguese population was and still
not that he's a white supremacist, but he's made some pretty weird comments.
The first blunder of colonization is just that. While the British sent off their poor to the countryside of America, the Portuguese sent off their rich to oversee productions in small cities. This wealth never left the rich, creating a huge wealth inequality seen to this day, one of the worst on earth. They had fancy estates to live in and yes, lots of money, but how
Lots
much
of cash,
infrastructure actually
dinero.
gets built with private investment? Almost none. It usually goes to some sort of production to which tons went.
A lot of Confederates moved to Brazil after the war because slavery was legal. Brazil has the most black people outside of Africa. Wow. He's like extremely right wing, yeah.
Brazil became an agricultural hotspot after the Europeans discovered sugar.
To
It
be
was the
fair,
perfect
southern
climate
Brazil
to
is
grow
more
sugarcane,
white than the
so like
southern
many other
US.
colonists, the Portuguese brought in African slaves. Anywhere from 6 to 10 million slaves were imported from West and
Oof.
Southern Africa, about 18 to 30 times more than the
Wow.
USA. It was so important to the colonists
Wow.
that slavery wasn't outlawed until 1888, the last country
1888. Shit. You know, that's like the year of the Spanish American War. That's fucking insane. That's so late. Wow. Imagine being a Confederate white supremacist and deciding to go to Brazil. That's a different kind of logic. Yeah. I don't get that logic, you know? One of the most diverse places in the world, and you go there, you know? It's kind of funny in a way. There's about 100,000 people in Argentina who are of British descent, and we had a war with Argentina in the 1980s. Yeah, Malvinas, you know? Not gonna, well, Falklands, Malvinas. Not going to talk about that. I don't see much condition in Brazil. It's actually very special in parts.
country in the Western world to do so. In addition, even though Pope Paul III made a papal bull declaring that no indigenous person of the Americas was to be enslaved, that didn't stop the Portuguese or anyone else really.
And the Spanish,
Natives
yeah.
captured by Brazilian banderas were forced to work in sugar plants or newly found gold mines. This
Ooh.
insane
Guys,
amount
do
of
not start a
slavery
debate
caused
on
a whole
the
plethora of
Falklands,
issues.
Malvinas.
More wealth inequality, dependence on agriculture, whole regions of the Northeast poor from slavery. Most of Brazil's wealth is concentrated on the southeast regions, outside of the tropical areas. The focus on agricultural production by the rich Portuguese settlers.
There was a secret society in the South, the Confederacy called the Knights of the Golden Circle. I think I've heard about that, actually. They wanted to take over Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Yeah, and that's where the Golden Circle was, right? They basically they wanted to expand plantations, right? And a lot of parts of Mexico and the Caribbean were perfect for plantations. I think
Its
that's
future.
that's
It's no
what's about.
surprise that with its agricultural history, Brazil nowadays would be a powerhouse of raw material. Its land is just perfect for it. Through farming, forestry, and mining, Brazil as a whole makes a lot of money. Its economy is the largest in Latin America with a GDP of 3.3
Sad
trillion
Mexico,
US dollars
I know.
or 15,000 per person. Its labor force is the sixth most populous on Earth with 107 million workers. These workers mainly extract raw material, but industry and services make up most of the Brazilian GDP, with Brazil producing a lot of steel and chemicals. But what they
Oh,
really
here's something interesting. Why are black and white used as race? Asians and Central Asians, Persians, etc., also white. Pacific Islanders, South Indians, etc., are blacker than most American black.
produce is produce. Coffee, soy, beef, chicken, milk, sugar, tobacco, cotton, maize, and gold, iron, copper, bauxite, tin, manganese, niobium, nickel. Brazil is a major producer of each of these products. If industry keeps growing in Brazil and they can process the bulk of their
Isn't the largest company in Brazil what's the name? Petrobras? That's basically the oil company, right?
products at home, then the world is in
Sopa do
for new
macaco.
economic power. The Brazilian population is 212 million, a quite large one, but it's not too stable. Even though the population has doubled in about 45 years and quadrupled in 70, the population will start to shrink in about 20 years. 30 million more Brazilians will enter the world before
20
the collapse
years.
happens, but it will still hit them hard. They don't have an insane amount of wealth or jobs like Western Europe or Japan to deal with the demographic collapse, so things could get ugly. And areas which saw higher levels of slavery are less well off. For instance, the Northeast has a literacy rate of about 80%, whereas countrywide it is around 90%. But for a middle power, Brazil has had a huge amount of migration to it throughout its history. Southern Europeans, Eastern Europeans, and especially Japanese came to Brazil in huge numbers,
Yeah,
carving
we were
Brazilian
talking
growth,
about that.
but they didn't settle in the countryside, they went to the cities. Brazil is a very urban country with an urbanization rate of around 85%.
Wow,
Many
that's
living
actually pretty high, 85%. So that's is it higher than America? Don't Brazil have a large Asian minority? They do. Members of Knights of the Golden Circle included Confederate President Jefferson Davis and John Wilkes Booth. Even famous outlaw Jesse James was a member. Oh, so they were pretty important people. President Jefferson Davis. Wow. So a lot of people supported that. The Brazil, yeah, Brazil has a very large, well, relatively large Asian minority.
Brazil's two largest cities, Sao Paulo
And
and
Rio.
de Janeiro,
Ooh, I
both
love
in the
Rio,
southeast.
man.
It's in these cities where another
Dun,
huge
dun,
Brazilian
dun.
problem reigns: violence.
Samba
Brazil has one
do
of the highest homicide
Brasil.
rates on Earth and ranks number 1 by total homicides.
Campao del mundo, Brasil número uno.
It's more than China, the USA, Europe, and Russia combined.
Wow.
Many of the top other
Oof,
homicidals
that's
are
fucking
also
insane.
in Latin America. The Spanish colonies were made much in the same way as Brazil. Rich owners coming with slaves rather than poor men
Who
coming
the
to
fuck
farm.
knows Brazil, yeah.
Unsurprisingly, urban areas in the northeast where the
True.
inequality is the worst nationwide have the highest homicide rates in the country. Urban
I
slums
love
have
the
never
song,
made
man.
crime
It's pretty
rates go
fucking
down.
catchy, you know?
Gangs are commonplace, and so is drug trafficking. But Brazil has recently begun a program to reduce gang
Just tell them 7. Oh, yeah, that's bad. They'll get triggered about it.
violence. It has dropped the homicide rate significantly, but Brazil still remains number 1 worldwide. It might be due to the huge amount of decentralization Brazil has had ever since its early
I don't know,
days.
dude. It's fucking
The
catchy.
escarpment, wet infrastructure, and huge coast meant most Brazilians were not linked until the modern day. Decentralized areas tend to focus on local rule,
Brazil.
and local rule usually has a lot of corruption. Even up to the central government, corruption is rampant in Brazilian politics. It's estimated that around $40 billion is lost annually due to corruption alone.
Whoa.
Clientelism.
Holy fuck. 40 billion, bro. 40 billion. That's so fucking bad. $40 billion. Damn, that's a lot.
Cronyism and nepotism are popular,
Thanks,
and
Dad.
many police
Yeah.
are prone to bribery. This was one of the many reasons for the 2013 protest and subsequent Operation Car Wash to investigate corruption and money laundering through Petrobras, a state-owned company. Since the operation, at least 5 major political figures have been jailed and their president was impeached. Maybe corruption and
Gilmar
homicide is getting
Rousseff.
better in Brazil, or maybe this is just a quick phase only to go back up in the future. In many ways, Brazil should have been a great power if it was settled similar to the way the US or Australia was, with low class or prisoners coming in and trying to work their way up. I think it would be like the
Yo, Brazil, welcome to the club, man. I feel for you. You know, nations that could have been good, but they weren't.
USA today, but instead its
I feel
geography
you.
and settlement didn't allow for that. With a long coast, massive rainforest, huge escarpment, and tropical climate, the Brazilians were stuck on the coast and could only produce food. That's what it has done to this day.
What's this
Brazil
obsession
is
with
one of the
Braze?
major suppliers of
Yeah, I don't
various types
know.
of foods and raw materials worldwide. Its
I
sharp
never
class
understood
divide
that.
between the original rich settlers and overseas slaves created a major wealth inequality today. And these poor Brazilians who reside in urban areas
Yeah.
make up one of the worst homicide problems on earth. It doesn't help
The
that the government is
favelas.
fairly corrupt, stunting major progress to
Sup,
turn the
Chapo?
nation
How are you
around.
doing, man?
Brazil is the country
to
of
see
the
you.
future. So is Brazil in the 1900s, and so will Brazil be in 20 years. With a lackluster industry and a demographic collapse with a fairly poor safety net, Brazil might be screwed. But who knows? Brazil should have always been a superpower. Maybe it will finally become one.
Oh, nations that could have been good but aren't. Hi, Venezuela. True, probably one of the biggest. I don't know. That's what Latinos say.
If you enjoyed this video, absolutely
Ooh. And he's Canadian, bro, and he has like the little Bieber on. That's cute.